In this lesson, we're going to learn about the end of the Civil War. The picture here is a picture of Richmond, Virginia, largely destroyed after the Civil War is over. So let's learn about how we get from Gettysburg to the end of the Civil War. Let's remind ourselves of our strategy in the Anaconda Plan. The Union's Anaconda Plan was trying to preserve the United States as one nation. They wanted to capture Richmond, Virginia. They want to capture the Mississippi River. They want to blockade southern port cities. Let's see how this has gone in 1864 and 65. We know the early part of the war, well, we haven't really studied blockading southern ports. We know in 1862 and 63, the Union forces have done very well at capturing the Mississippi River. And by the time the Battle of Gettysburg happens in July of 1863, this part of the Anaconda Plan is almost finished. But certainly it's been a struggle for the Union side to capture Richmond, Virginia. 62 and 63, there's one loss after the next. So let's see how this all proceeds after the Battle of Gettysburg. Take your note sheet that you picked up, and let's take a look. The rest of the war in the West around the Mississippi River is going to be finished up actually fairly quickly and maybe a little more simply than in the East. The Union plan in 1864 and 65 is total war. Total war is intended to destroy everything your enemy could possibly use to keep the war going. So what you want to do is use your army to destroy the food supplies, the transportation, the manufacturing. We know the South doesn't have a whole lot of that in the first place. So the total war strategy becomes to destroy anything the South could use to continue fighting the war. Two places in particular where that's going on is the Shenandoah Valley of West Virginia, where General Philip Henry Sheridan, Fightin' Phil, is trying to destroy everything that the Confederates could use. And General William Sherman, who's in the picture on our right, is going to destroy a large part of the South from Nashville, Tennessee to Atlanta, Georgia, and then from Atlanta to Savannah. He's doing that throughout 1864 and has pretty much finished the job by Christmas of 1864 into the spring of 65. So total war becomes the strategy in the West, and it's very successful for the Union side. The rest of the war in the East, where we've always been trying to capture Richmond, is also very important. We talked about the Battle of Gettysburg being a turning point in the war because things are going to start to go better. But is Gettysburg the last battle of the war? Is it the final battle? No. There's almost 2 more years of war in the East. But our strategy becomes to fight a war of attrition. General Grant had been doing so well out there fighting in the West that he is transferred to the East to fight in the East. At first, some of Lincoln's advisors didn't think he should do that because General Grant drank too much. Well, President Lincoln's famous response was, find out what Grant drinks and give it to all my generals so he can find somebody who will fight and win in the East. Grant's strategy is to fight a war of attrition, meaning you just keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting. Wear the Confederates out so they're forced to quit. General Grant just needs to fight battles. He doesn't need to win. He just needs to keep fighting. Eventually, the Southerners will run out of supplies. They'll run out of manufacturing materials. They'll run out of money. They're not getting help from the foreign countries like they needed. They'll eventually run out of men, and they'll have to quit. Now, General Lee of the South has known this will happen. He's been able to foresee this coming. So he's been trying to win the war before it got to be too long because he knows he can't survive it. If the Confederate Army has to keep fighting, 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 the Union will eventually overwhelm them with their power and their manufacturing. And that's what's going to happen here. On the map, General Lee's army is trying to protect Richmond. We're going to look at 4 battle names just to show you that General Grant is just going to keep fighting, 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 fighting. Doesn't win all of these battles, but he is trying to keep the Confederates fighting so the Confederates will lose men and material and money every time they fight and eventually have to quit. Number 1 is a place called the Wilderness. Starting in May of 1864, about 10 months after Gettysburg, the 2 armies, the Army of Northern Virginia under General Lee and General Grant's Army of the Potomac, are going to fight at the Wilderness, where the Confederates are going to win. It's a very densely tangled, wooded area. It's very difficult to keep any kind of order in your troops. It's just a horrible scene where wounded soldiers can't get out of the burning woods. It's just awful. A few days later at Spotsylvania, the two big armies move out of the wilderness, and again, the Union side is attacking. They're losing a lot of soldiers. Eventually, though, they know that the Confederates will run out of soldiers first. Number 3 is Cold Harbor, a place where General Grant ordered an infantry assault into the Confederate lines. It's a disaster. General Grant always regretted it. But the point remains that the more they fight, the more the Union will be able to wear out the Confederates, so they have to quit. Petersburg is a fourth example. Petersburg has the last open railroad line into Richmond. When the Confederates had been receiving supplies from Petersburg and the railroad into Richmond, but once Petersburg is attacked and held under siege, meaning the Union forces surrounded and they don't allow any equipment or people or supplies to get into Richmond, well, eventually it'll be just a matter of time until the Confederates can't survive in Richmond anymore. That siege goes on for about 10 months, with the two armies kind of looking at each other and not really fighting a lot. Finally, General Lee realizes his army can't survive much longer. By April of 1865, the Union Army attacks Richmond and captures it, but General Lee's army is able to escape. They're able to get out here to the western part of the state of Virginia. They'll finally be caught at a place called Appomattox, and that's where the last big battle of the war in the East takes place. April 9th, General Lee realizes that this just can't go on any longer. So he and his men will surrender, and that will pretty much end the war in the East. Yes, there is still some fighting that goes on, but it's pretty much over when General Lee surrenders. Now, when an army surrenders, there are always terms of surrender. So the Union Army under General Grant and President Lincoln are going to offer some very kind terms of surrender to the Confederates. One thing is the Confederates are able to just turn in their weapons and go home. They're going to, because this is April, they're going to get any crops in the fields to be harvested in the fall. They're going to have to get home and do it. And so the soldiers are really free to go once they turn in their weapons. Those soldiers are allowed to take their horses or mules with them. They'll need those to get a crop planted and to start taking care of their property at home again. So it's important to let those Southerners take their horses and mules home. Officers are allowed to keep their weapons, kind of as a sign of respect and healing. What's not happening to these Confederate soldiers over on the other side of the page, we're not doing what often is done to a defeated army. Often you would capture the defeated soldiers, you'd arrest them, imprison them, punish them in some way, or execute them for treason, or take their property away from them. Well, President Lincoln doesn't want to do that. His job through the war all along has been to win the war. But now that that is done, the war is over, President Lincoln's job changes to being someone now who needs to heal the country and restore the South to its normal state of being full and full states. So President Lincoln is really trying to forgive and forget. He's trying to heal the nation and move forward. This is how the Civil War would come to an end in 1865. The Union side pretty much accomplishing their Anaconda Plan, and then President Lincoln beginning a path to restore the South to health. President Lincoln's plan doesn't go real far because he's assassinated just a few days later. That's the story we'll do next.